Jane stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror, wondering when she'd become invisible. 5 years of living with Aaron, and somehow she'd managed to disappear completely from her own relationship. The contradiction was stark. Jane ran her own freelance graphic design business from their apartment, earning good money, while Aaron was off playing corporate warrior at her marketing firm. Jane was literally always there, yet Aaron never seemed to see her anymore. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Thanks so much for watching. "I'm heading out early again," Erin called from the bedroom, already dressed in her sharp navy suit. It was barely 7 in the morning, but Erin's day had started an hour ago with emails and conference calls. Jane padded out in her pajamas, coffee mug in hand. "What about dinner tonight? I thought we could try that new Thai place." "Can't. Client dinner." Erin was already at the door, briefcase in one hand, phone in the other. "Rain check?" The door closed with a soft click before Jane could respond. Rain check. Everything with Erin was a rain check these days. Jane had tried everything. Surprise visits to Erin's office with lunch, planning weekend getaways that Erin inevitably canceled for work emergencies. She'd even suggested couples therapy, which Erin dismissed with a distracted, "We're fine, babe, just busy." But they weren't fine. Jane felt like she was drowning in their perfectly decorated apartment, surrounded by the life they'd built together, but utterly alone in it. That's how she ended up at Grind Coffee every morning. At least there, surrounded by the gentle hum of conversation and the smell of fresh pastries, she felt less isolated. She'd claimed the corner table by the window as her unofficial office, laptop open, working on whatever project was due that week. That's also where she first noticed Dakota. Dakota was impossible not to notice, really. She moved like the world was her personal stage, all confidence and grace, like she'd never questioned her right to take up space. Her dark hair was cut in a sharp asymmetrical bob that Jane found herself studying from behind her laptop screen. There were small silver hoops in her ears, and when she laughed, which she did often, throwing her head back with genuine delight, Jane caught glimpses of something metallic on her tongue. For weeks, Jane watched Dakota from across the cafe. Dakota usually came in around 10, ordered something different each day, always asking the baristas about their recommendations, and sat at various tables, never the same one twice. She'd pull out a beat-up paperback novel or sketchpad, completely absorbed in whatever held her attention that day. Jane noticed things. The way Dakota dressed like she was starring in her own indie film, vintage band t-shirts, high-waisted jeans that fit like they were tailored for her, combat boots that looked genuinely worn rather than fashionably distressed, the way she talked to everyone like they were old friends, even the grumpy businessman who came in every day complaining about the music being too loud. Most of all, Jane noticed how Dakota seemed genuinely happy, not the performative happiness Jane had perfected for Erin's work events, but something real and unguarded. It took Jane 3 weeks to work up the courage to say anything beyond "excuse me" when she needed to squeeze past Dakota's chair to get to the bathroom. The opportunity came on a Tuesday morning when Dakota was sitting at the table next to Jane's usual spot, sketching something that looked like lingerie designs. Jane had been pretending to work on a logo for a local bakery, but she'd mostly been stealing glances at Dakota's drawings. "Those are really beautiful," Jane finally said, her heart hammering against her ribs. Dakota looked up, and Jane was struck by how green her eyes were, like sea glass, with flecks of gold around the pupils. "Thanks." Dakota's smile was warm, unguarded. "I'm working on a pitch for this boutique downtown. They want to carry more inclusive sizing, which is rad. But I'm trying to figure out how to make everything look sexy without being You know, male-gazy. Jane found herself leaning closer. Can I see? For the next hour, they talked about design, about art, about the challenge of creating things that felt authentic and beautiful rather than manufactured for mass appeal. Dakota was smart, really smart, but with this wicked sense of humor that caught Jane off guard. She'd make these observations that were both hilarious and oddly profound, like when she said the worst thing about working in fashion was having to pretend that beige is a personality trait. When Jane mentioned struggling with a particularly demanding client, Dakota grinned and said, "Ah, the classic make it pop, but also subtle, but also revolutionary, but also exactly like everyone else brief. Those people should come with a warning label." "I'm Dakota, by the way," she said as she packed up her sketch pad. Jane. The name felt different coming out of her mouth, like she was introducing herself for the first time in years. "Well, Jane, this was the highlight of my morning. Maybe we'll run into each other again?" "Maybe," Jane managed, trying to keep her voice steady. After Dakota left, Jane sat staring at her laptop screen, the bakery logo forgotten. She felt awake, like someone had just turned on lights in a room she hadn't realized was dark. The next morning, Dakota waved her over to share her table. They talked about books this time. Dakota was rereading Giovanni's Room for what she claimed was the dozenth time. "Baldwin just gets it, you know," Dakota said, stirring honey into her coffee. "The way love can feel like salvation and destruction at the same time." Jane did know, actually. She'd been thinking about that exact feeling for months, though she'd never had words for it. Their morning conversations became routine. Dakota would save Jane a seat, and they'd talk about everything and nothing. Dakota's dual life as both lingerie model and freelance designer, which explained why she was always sketching. Jane's clients, books they'd read, places they wanted to travel. Dakota had stories about photo shoots in abandoned warehouses and fashion shows in Brooklyn lofts, but also about difficult design clients who wanted something sexy but classy, but edgy, but not too edgy. She made Jane laugh in a way she'd forgotten she could. "You should come to my show next Friday," Dakota said one morning, pulling a flyer from her bag. "It's this underground thing in Williamsburg. Very artsy, very gay, very fun." Jane looked at the flyer, glossy black with silver text advertising, "Body Electric, a celebration of feminine power." Dakota's name was listed as one of the featured models. I'm not sure I can," Jane said, thinking immediately of Erin, of how she'd react to Jane going to something like this without her. Dakota's expression softened. "You're in a relationship." It wasn't a question. Jane nodded, surprised by the relief she felt at having it acknowledged. "5 years," Jane said. "We live together. And she doesn't know about our coffee dates." Another statement, not a question. Dakota had a way of seeing straight through things. "There's nothing to know about," Jane said quickly, then felt stupid for how defensive she sounded. Dakota smiled, but there was something sad in it. "Jane, can I ask you something? When's the last time you felt excited about your own life?" The question hit Jane like a physical blow. She opened her mouth to answer and realized she couldn't remember. "I should go," Jane said, closing her laptop with shaking hands. Dakota didn't try to stop her, just said quietly, "The offer stands, if you change your mind." That night, Jane made Erin's favorite pasta and opened a bottle of wine. She decided to tell Erin about Dakota. Not that there was anything to tell, really, but the fact that she'd been hiding even these innocent conversations felt wrong. "How was your day?" Jane asked as Erin scrolled through her phone between bites. "Insane!" The Henderson account is imploding, and now they want us to completely rebrand before the launch. Erin didn't look up from her screen. I've been going to this coffee shop in the mornings, Jane began. I met this woman. That's nice, babe. Erin's phone buzzed, and she immediately opened whatever message had just come in. Shit, I need to call Tokyo. Can we talk later? Erin was already standing, phone pressed to her ear, speaking in the bright, animated tone she reserved for work. Jane sat alone at their dining table, looking at the candles she'd lit, the nice dinner growing cold, the wine she'd opened to celebrate what exactly? She went to Dakota's show. She didn't plan to. Friday evening, she'd been sitting in their apartment while Erin worked late again, staring at the flyer Dakota had given her, when something inside her just broke open. The venue was exactly what she'd expected. A converted warehouse in Brooklyn with exposed brick walls and industrial lighting. The crowd was young, diverse, dressed like they'd raided the coolest thrift stores in the city. Jane felt overdressed in her simple black dress and cardigan, but also invisible in the best possible way. The show was unlike anything she'd ever experienced. Models of all sizes and colors moved wearing intricate lingerie that looked more like wearable art than underwear. The music was sultry and electronic, the lighting dramatic and intimate. It was sexy, yes, but in a way that felt empowering rather than exploitative. When Dakota appeared, Jane's breath caught. She wore a deep emerald set, bra and high-waisted panties with intricate lace detailing that looked like it had been painted on her skin. Her confidence was magnetic. She moved like she was dancing even when she was walking. When she caught Jane's eye in the crowd, her face lit up with genuine surprise and delight. After the show, Dakota found Jane near the bar. "You came," she said, still glowing with post-performance energy. "You were incredible," Jane said, and meant it. "All of you were. This whole thing was just beautiful." Dakota's smile was radiant. "Want to get out of here? I know a place." The place turned out to be a tiny cocktail bar tucked into a basement in the Lower East Side. It felt like a secret, all dim lighting and velvet banquettes, and music you had to lean in to hear. "So," Dakota said, settling into the booth across from Jane, "what made you change your mind?" Jane sipped her cocktail, something with gin and lavender that Dakota had recommended. "Honestly, I'm tired of pretending everything's fine when it's not. I'm tired of fighting for something that maybe isn't worth saving anymore." "In your relationship?" "In my life." The words came out before Jane could stop them, raw and honest in a way that surprised her. Dakota reached across the table and touched Jane's hand lightly. "Tell me." So Jane did. She told Dakota about the past 2 years of feeling like she was disappearing, about trying everything to reconnect with Erin, about feeling guilty for wanting more than what she had. She told her about the loneliness that had become so constant, she'd started to think it was just part of who she was now. Dakota listened without judgment, occasionally asking gentle questions, but mostly just being present in a way Jane had forgotten people could be. "Can I tell you something?" Dakota said when Jane finished talking. "That first day you complimented my drawings, I'd been watching you for weeks. You looked so sad sitting there by yourself. I wanted to say something, but you seemed so closed off. When you finally talked to me, it was like watching someone wake up." Jane felt heat rise in her chest, a mixture of desire and something deeper, more complicated. "I should go home," she said, but she didn't move. "Should you?" Dakota's fingers were still touching Jane's hand, light as a feather. "Or do you want to see where this goes?" Jane looked at Dakota, at the small silver stud in her tongue when she smiled, at the way her eyes crinkled at the corners, at the gentle challenge in her expression. Dakota wasn't pushing, She was offering. The choice was entirely Jane's. Where would it go? Jane asked quietly. I don't know, Dakota admitted. But maybe that's not the point. Maybe the point is just feeling alive. Jane thought about Aaron, probably still at the office, probably not even wondering where Jane was. She thought about their apartment, beautiful and cold and empty of anything real. She thought about the last time she'd felt truly seen, truly wanted. Okay, she said. Dakota's apartment was a studio in Bushwick, tiny but warm and completely, uniquely hers. The walls were covered with her sketches and photos from various shoots. Books were stacked everywhere. A half-finished oil painting sat on an easel by the window. It's not much, Dakota said, suddenly shy in a way Jane hadn't seen before. It's perfect, Jane said, and she meant it. The space felt alive, creative, authentic in a way her and Aaron's carefully curated apartment never had. Dakota poured them wine from a bottle that looked expensive, despite the apartment's bohemian simplicity. They sat on Dakota's bed, which doubled as her couch, and talked more. About art, about dreams, about the way fear could disguise itself as practicality. I used to want to be a painter, Jane admitted. Before I got into graphic design, I was actually pretty good. What happened? Jane shrugged. Life, bills. Aaron said it wasn't practical, and she was probably right. Was she? Dakota's voice was gentle but challenging. Or was she scared that if you followed your dreams, you might outgrow her? The observation stung because it felt true. They were sitting close now, close enough that Jane could see the gold flecks in Dakota's eyes, could smell her perfume, something warm and spicy that reminded Jane of summer evenings. Dakota reached up to touch Jane's cheek. Jane was done pretending, done holding back. She pulled Dakota closer and kissed her. The kiss started soft, but it didn't stay that way. Jane felt the heat rise fast, spreading from her chest to her fingertips as Dakota leaned in closer, hungrier. It wasn't just desire, it was something deeper, something Jane had kept locked away. Like remembering what it meant to be wanted and wanting back without apology. Dakota's hands slipped beneath the hem of Jane's shirt, warm fingers brushing against bare skin as she slowly eased the fabric upward. Jane exhaled sharply at the contact, unexpected in how reverent it felt, like Dakota wasn't just touching her body, but everything Jane thought she had to hide. When Dakota peeled off her own top, Jane's breath caught. Twin silver bars glinted on her chest, piercings. Jane's eyes lingered, startled not by the metal itself, but by the sudden rush it stirred inside her. It was bold, beautiful, and completely Dakota. Dakota noticed her staring and tilted her head, smiling just a little. You okay? She asked, her voice low but light, like this wasn't the first time she'd surprised someone. Jane nodded, her voice barely a whisper. Yeah, more than okay. Their mouths found each other again, slower now, deeper. Jane felt the cool glide of Dakota's tongue piercing, and it sent a spark all the way down her spine. Her hands roamed without thinking, fingertips tracing the outline of a shoulder, a hip, the curve of Dakota's back. Every touch felt new and yet like something she'd been aching for without knowing. They moved together gently, but with a kind of urgency, as if neither of them wanted to break the spell but couldn't hold back any longer. Dakota's focus never wavered. Every shift, every kiss, every whispered breath felt like it was just for Jane. She couldn't remember the last time someone had made her feel that way. Later, wrapped up in each other beneath tangled sheets, the room still warm with their shared energy, neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. The quiet said everything. For the first time in a long time, Jane wasn't second-guessing what she'd just allowed herself to feel. She was just letting herself feel it. Regrets? Dakota asked softly. No. Not about this. Dakota pressed a kiss to Jane's temple. Good. They fell asleep like that, and Jane woke up feeling more rested than she had in months. Over the next few days, Jane felt like she was living in two different worlds. There was her life with Aaron, dinner conversations about work, evenings spent on opposite sides of their couch with their respective laptops, the comfortable but distant routine they'd perfected. And there was the world that existed in her morning conversations with Dakota, full of possibility and genuine connection. She didn't sleep with Dakota again, but the intimacy between them deepened in other ways. Dakota would brush Jane's hand when passing her coffee, would lean close to show her something on her phone, would look at her with eyes that held the memory of that night between them. Jane found herself thinking about painting again. She started sketching during their conversations, just idle doodles at first, but Dakota encouraged her, asked to see more, made her remember why she'd loved creating things in the first place. You should take a class, Dakota suggested one morning. There's this studio in Soho that offers figure drawing workshops. I couldn't, Jane said automatically. Why not? Jane opened her mouth to list the reasons: money, time, Aaron's reaction, but realized that none of them were real obstacles. They were just fears. The breaking point came 3 weeks after Dakota's show. Jane had signed up for a Saturday morning painting workshop and was excited in a way she hadn't felt in years. She planned to tell Aaron about it over dinner, to maybe even invite her along. But when she brought it up, Aaron barely looked up from her laptop. That's nice, babe, she said absently. Just make sure it doesn't interfere with the Hendersons' anniversary party next month. We need to make a good impression. Jane stared at her girlfriend. This woman she'd loved, lived with, built a life alongside, and realized that Aaron had no idea who she was anymore. Maybe had never known. Aaron, Jane said quietly, when's the last time you asked me how I was feeling? What? Aaron looked up, confused by the shift in tone. How I was feeling? When's the last time you asked? Aaron's expression grew defensive. I ask you about your day all the time. You ask about my work, about my schedule, about logistics. When's the last time you asked about me? Jane, I don't know what this is about, but I'm really slammed right now. I slept with someone else. The words hung in the air between them like something physical. Aaron's face went through several expressions: confusion, disbelief, hurt, anger. You what? Jane felt surprisingly calm. I met someone. We've been talking for weeks. Last Friday we slept together. Aaron closed her laptop with deliberate care. Who? Her name is Dakota. She's... Jane searched for words. She sees me. She sees you. Aaron's voice was flat, controlled. What the hell does that mean? It means she knows I stopped painting. It means she remembers things I tell her. It means when she asks how I am, she actually wants to know the answer. They stared at each other across the coffee table that suddenly felt like a chasm. So what now? Aaron asked finally. Are you leaving me for her? The question caught Jane off guard because she realized she hadn't been thinking that far ahead. The affair with Dakota hadn't been about replacing Aaron. It had been about finding herself. I don't know, Jane said honestly. I know I can't keep living like this. Invisible. Alone in my own relationship. Aaron was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer, more vulnerable than Jane had heard in months. I didn't realize you felt invisible. I tried to tell you, so many times. I know. Work has been crazy, and I thought we were solid. I thought we could coast for a while. Jane felt a flicker of the old love, the connection that had brought them together 5 years ago. But it wasn't enough anymore. "I don't want to coast," Jane said. "I want to feel alive in my own life." Aaron nodded slowly, and Jane could see her processing, trying to understand. "Is that what she gives you? This Dakota?" Jane thought about how to answer honestly without being cruel. "She showed me that I was allowed to want more. Not necessarily more from you. Just more, period." They talked until late that night for the first time in months. Aaron cried, which Jane hadn't seen her do in years. They both apologized, Aaron for her neglect, Jane for the betrayal. But even as they held each other on their couch, Jane knew something fundamental had shifted. "I think," Jane said carefully, "we should take some time apart to figure out what we actually want." Aaron pulled back to look at her. "You mean separate?" "I mean, I should probably stay somewhere else for a while. We both need space to think." Aaron was quiet for a long time. Finally, she nodded. "Okay." Jane moved out the next week into a tiny sublet in the village that she found online. It was smaller than Dakota's studio, with barely enough room for her clothes and laptop. But it was enough. Dakota helped her move, showing up with a pickup truck borrowed from a friend and an army of gorgeous, androgynous model friends who treated the whole thing like a party. They packed Jane's belongings with care and excitement, as if they were helping her embark on an adventure rather than flee a failing relationship. "You sure about this?" Dakota asked as they loaded the last box. Jane looked back at the apartment she'd shared with Aaron. Beautiful, cold, full of compromises she was no longer willing to make. "Yeah," she said. "I'm sure." But something unexpected happened over the next few weeks. As Jane settled into her new space, started her painting class, began to rebuild her life around her own desires rather than someone else's expectations, she realized she didn't need Dakota the way she'd thought she did. She loved Dakota, cared about her deeply, was grateful for everything she'd shown her about possibility and self-worth. But the connection that had felt so urgent in the context of her dying relationship with Aaron felt different now that Jane was free. "I think we need to talk," Jane said one morning over coffee. Dakota smiled, but there was understanding in her eyes. "About how this was never really about me." Jane felt relieved that she didn't have to explain. "You knew?" "I hoped," Dakota said. "The best affairs aren't about the other person. They're about discovering who you are when you're not trying to be who someone else needs you to be." They remained friends, real friends, the kind who remembered each other's birthdays and sent each other articles they thought the other would find interesting. Dakota started dating a photographer she met at a gallery opening, someone who appreciated both her artistic ambitions and her fierce independence. Jane painted. She took classes, joined a studio co-op, started selling small pieces to friends and local cafes. She went on dates occasionally, some with women, some with men, all with the understanding that she was figuring herself out and wasn't looking for anything serious. Aaron texted her sometimes, updates about work, photos of their old apartment redecorated, invitations to events that Jane politely declined. A year later, Jane had her first solo art show at a small gallery in Chelsea. The paintings were abstract but emotional, swirls of color that seemed to capture the feeling of waking up, of coming alive, of discovering that you were allowed to take up space in the world. Dakota came to the opening, beaming with pride. "Look at you," she said, gesturing to the red dots next to several of the paintings, indicating sales. "I knew you had it in you." Jane looked around the gallery, at her paintings on the walls, at the small crowd of people who'd come to see her work, at the life she'd built from scratch. "Thank you," she said to Dakota, "for showing me it was possible." Dakota squeezed her hand. You did the work. I just reminded you that you were worth it. Standing there in her first solo show, surrounded by evidence of her own creativity and courage, Jane realized that the loneliness that had driven her to Dakota in the first place had been transformed into something else entirely. Solitude, the rich, full kind of being alone, that came from knowing yourself completely, from being enough for yourself. She didn't need someone else to complete her anymore. She was already whole.